Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Write Better Stories. Today I am going to talk about a book called We Monks and Soldiers. Joining me is my co-host Pringle, the patron saint of cuties. And for this book I'm going to focus on three things. I'm going to talk about the author, I am going to talk about the interesting world that he's built both in this novel and then in a series of novels and experimental fictional forms that he's developed, and then also an interesting use of first-person plural POV in this book. So keep in mind it's called We Monks and Soldiers. He doesn't use that throughout the entire thing, but we'll talk about that in a moment. First of all, Lutz Bassman, or Bassman, that is actually a pseudonym for an author called Antoine Volodine, which I believe is also a pseudonym. So I don't know who this real guy is or what his real name is, but I believe most prominently he writes under the name Antoine Volodine. And he has a very ambitious literary project that he's created called Post-Exoticism. And the actual rules of what makes the genre post-exotic are laid out in a book that he wrote called Post-Exoticism in 10 Lessons, Lesson 11. And if you can tell by that title, the book itself is considered an example of post-exoticism as well as a description of post-exoticism. So if you're a fan of postmodernism, this is going to be right up your alley. There's a lot of metafiction, there's intertextuality, and a lot of formal play and experimentation that is really fun, but also, I'll say, not super heady. For as complex and conceptual as some of it can be, a lot of the prose is pretty straightforward, and I don't think any of the concepts are very difficult to wrap your head around. That being said, it's extremely trippy. I think he also has a new book coming out in February, I don't know why I said it like that, under a pen name Manuela Draeger, and this is about a bunch of leftists that get trapped in a building and burned alive, and then their dreams rise from the ashes, and the book is an exploration of those. So as you can see, this is blending together a lot of really interesting ideas and weird pieces of imagery all in one big swirl in the world that he's built. So like I said, there's politics, there's metafiction, there's shamanism, there's magic, there's consciousnesses leaving bodies and entering other bodies, there's shaman that trap you in dream worlds, and it's extremely fun. And like I said too, the prose is really straightforward, so I think it's very accessible, and even though there's not always very conclusive endings to the books that he writes, trying to just figure out the rules of the world, I think, are satisfying enough to make this book fun, and not just ending with like a shrug, which some of these experimental works can do. So basically, one of the interesting metafictional aspects of this that I find really fun and rewarding to have read several of these books is that he'll refer to other authors writing in this post-exotic form, and it's almost like in Death on the Nile and other Agatha Christie books where she'll take a mention or take a moment to mention how there was another installment in the series, like Poirot, if I'm saying his name right, mentions that he solves a mystery on the Orient Express in this book. And so it just rewards you as a reader to have read several of these books, and it kind of creates that sense of intertextuality. They also do this in Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, which is one of my favorite books. And I love it in that book because he mentions other installments of the adventures from the Chums of Chance that don't even exist, but it just really builds that world and their sense of being these fictional characters that are guiding you. So by bringing up those different authors and those different works of post-exoticism within his post-exotic works, one, it's fun just because it touches onto those metafictional and intertextual themes, but then also I think it fleshes out the world a lot more, that since he's exploring a lot of things about politics and society, you get the sense that a lot of these people who are writing are reacting to something that's very real and commenting on it. But then, kind of breaking away from that political bent, a lot of the things that they're writing about end up being very magical and surreal. And in Post-Exoticism, in 10 Lessons, Lesson 11, I believe one of the tenets of what makes something post-exotic is that it's like written in a jail cell in a post-apocalyptic society after capitalism has created a nuclear holocaust, and knowing that no one will ever read what you're writing. So you get the sense as you're reading these books that, one, you're engaging with this really interesting fantasy world, but then two, almost as if you're resurrecting the spirits of these dead proletarian brothers and sisters just by reading it. So that's like a really powerful thing, and something that I think pushes metafiction beyond just like formal experimentation. So the last thing that I wanted to do today was to read just a little section here where he uses the first person plural as the POV, and I'm going to comment on that afterward. Really the only thing that you need to know before I read this is that the names Mong and Fuchs are characters that are from this dimension, and they travel between dimensions in order to go on some sort of anti-capitalist mission. So, at long last, we dared to imagine the voyage's end. I say we, so as not to be forever repeating Mong and Fuchs. Soon we entered the place where the others had dreamt of sending us, where their dreams were now sending us, a backup proletarian universe. We were going to have that privilege. We were going to know the happiness no one had concretely experienced until then. Behind us, we'd left a hell ruled by assassins and capitalism. Even in a flawed or degenerate form, a proletarian universe could only be better. That prospect partly made up for our weariness. There were remnants of courage and energy deep inside us. We summoned them up. A modest euphoria settled over us, perhaps also caused by our neglecting to decompress as we changed depths. Depths, I believe, referring to the different depths of the dimensions that they're going back and forth in. And so I think that this is interesting because, again, we do get this formal play of him using the plural first person. And this is something he also did in my favorite book of his called Radiant Terminus. And the effect of it in both of them, I think, is to sort of like dismantle and to deconstruct point of view in general. That we start out by focusing on these in the third person, focusing on these characters, and then it switches into first person plural, and he'll interchangeably go back and forth between those. And then in Radiant Terminus, it's a lot of first person to third person interplay, and it might be second person as well. I haven't read that one in a couple of years, but I think that in Radiant Terminus too, he also comments on it, is that it's like either or. It could be I POV or he POV or I or she POV. It doesn't really matter. It could be first or third person at any given time. And I think this just kind of calls attention to the way that each of these respective POVs affect the narrative, that you're rooted within a character when it's like first person, and with third person it's more supposed to be a fly on the wall, but then by blending them together you just see the different shades of those. But then also I think it really supports his themes a lot in these books, is that a lot of these are the proletariat that are trying to rise up and fight against capitalism, and a lot of times they're really not successful or even optimistic that they can succeed. They're just kind of going through the motions. And so by saying like we, or by blending I and he together, he's sort of wrapping up the idea of people coming together and creating this post-exotic literary form that is this communitarian thing that's supposed to be fighting against these evil capitalists. So I think in general this book is probably not my favorite one of his, but I did really enjoy it a lot. The vignette that was the first one is, I think, the most interesting one. The rest of them are still very cool and very graphic and full of really interesting imagery. So I'm going to actually spoil the first one right now, so if you don't want to have that one spoiled for you, then you can feel free to turn off the video right here. Okay, so going forward, the first one has to do with this exorcist that enters this house and walks around the house on the inside and the outside, and he's obviously supposed to get these spirits out of the house. And then the spirits start appearing, and he's basically being like, you're trapped in a dream world, you need to get out of here, I cast you forth, etc. But then one of the spirits appears and says that same exact thing to him. Like, you're a spirit here. You're trapped in this dream world. I cast you forth. Get out of here. And so that's almost kind of like a Sixth Sense ending, that the main guy thought that he was dealing with a kid who sees dead people, but then he's the dead people. This is exactly, or not exactly the same, but it's like pretty similar, that this is a guy thinking that he is at least at some sort of baseline reality dealing with these spirits, but then it seems that he is also trapped in a dream world and people feel the need to exorcise him as well. So if any of this tickles your fancy, this is the sort of imagery that you can expect from these books. They're really, really fun and very conceptual and postmodern. Like I said, a lot of these stories and vignettes deal with consciousnesses leaving their bodies and going into other bodies. And I think one of the aspects of the nuclear holocaust is that a lot of people started turning into animals. I haven't totally gotten closure on that detail, but that's been mentioned in several of the books. I don't know if it was because of the nuclear holocaust, but it seems that either consciousnesses migrate into animals or people degenerate into animals. In this book, there's talk about humanity basically seeing its end date, and then whatever is going to come after them are not going to have to deal with humans anymore, and that's kind of part of the pessimism of their proletarian uprising. So I think that's kind of interesting too, because he seems to be writing with a little bit of awareness about the 20th century, and definitely not saying like, oh, all of the implementations of communism failed, so capitalism is good. He's obviously very against capitalism in this book, but he doesn't seem super hopeful that the proletarian uprising is going to do anything. And so I think that if you can take anything hopeful from that message in the book, is almost as that these dream worlds and migrating consciousnesses are this sort of elevated spirit of the proletarian continuing to fight capitalism even after their death. So I hope this helps you write better stories. Definitely check out his books, and look for that next one that's coming out. I forget what it's called, but it's by Manuela Draeger. That's the pseudonym he writes under for that. So have a good day. Pringle, do you have anything to say? There was a character in this book who is either characterized or actually is a bird. And so Pringle really liked that part.